Welcome to GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Dave Anderson and our guest tonight, Florian Kunin. Thanks for joining us, guys, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to have a conversation on tennis. Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about Florian?
Well, good evening. And Coach Florian and I crossed paths. It's probably been about 18 months, I estimate, maybe a little bit more. A couple of kids that he was spending a lot of time with in Dallas came to check out our program. And I remember because it was during our huge pickleball event, which reduced our whole space and everything. And anyways, I filmed these kids and was taking them in to do an analysis. And then the parents had invited Coach Florian. And, I knew instantly, I had a feeling that there was a very unique person there and a person who was, number one, tuned into tennis and loved the sport and a tremendous student of the game. And it's sad to say that he retained and gathered more out of the video analysis than the two sets of kids. They didn't stay in the program. They left, shortly after, and both are relocated to academies in Florida. I know, I bet he could recall the 2 hours spent in there minimum vividly. And so, yeah, really excited. And then we just stayed connected after that. And, I asked if he's got a career already outside of tennis, but his passion, I think, is tennis. And through that, I've been able to bring him on staff whenever we can get him to the club. And he is a constant fixture at the club at 6 a.m. He comes out and just works on his own game and hits balls in a lot of my lessons with kids and instant energy. So, yeah, it's been a real pleasure to get to cross paths with you and get to know you, Coach.
Same here. Thank you for the nice words, and pleasure to be here. Actually, great honor to be on the tennis podcast. So, yes, thank you.
Florian, I said earlier before we came on air that the conversation you and I had a couple of weeks, that could have been a podcast. Let's go back to the beginning. Tell us about your first days in tennis, Florian.
Yeah, my first days in tennis are not the typical way of how you learn tennis. I'm basically one of those that just played club tennis in Germany, of course. I grew up in Germany and started playing tennis maybe at, 6, but with zero instruction. My parents had no idea about tennis. And of course, I won the club championship, so everybody thought I'm really, really good. Yeah, so that's really my start. I didn't have any ambitions in tennis. I didn't have any goals in tennis, just playing it because in Germany, you play 3 sports. So I played soccer, basketball, and tennis. Both my brother and I, we really kind of fell in love with the idea of this is the one thing where you are in control and also it's all on you, even though maybe the racket is the reason for the problem this today and the wind and the sand and all the excuses that we players find. But what's nice about it is you could always find the reason why you lost or why you won in yourself. So yeah, that's kind of how I started, really, in local club tennis, and just made my way into more by wanting to learn more about the game, really.
What part of Germany?
I grew up close to Frankfurt, about an hour 15 from there, in a small town, 3,000 people, 3 tennis courts, and yeah, small local town.
I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time in Germany. Because of Steffi Graf and Boris Becker, there was a boom. We had the boom in the 70s, but in the 80s, tennis was just on fire, and you couldn't get a tennis court. A teaching pro, if you wanted to hit a few balls, you had to hit after midnight. That's for sure. But yeah, I've been all over Germany.
Yeah, I remember from our first chat. Yeah, I was probably at the back end of that boom. Germany started going into golfing more. On the tennis used to be, as you know, a bit of an elite thing in Germany, and so that shifted over a bit to golf. So we were at the end of that era when we started playing. So you could find court time easier, but mainly you couldn't really find any coaches that knew how to coach you how to actually play tennis, other than throw some balls. And so we were at the back end. So we got probably the coaches that were making good money, but not a lot of value for the actual player that wanted to learn how to play the game.
How about your brother? Practice partner, older, younger?
He's a year and a half younger. He played at D1 college in University of Southern Alabama. Lives in North Carolina now, so we're both in the United States. And yeah, one of those guys that can pick up the racket at any given moment and probably still have perfect rhythm. Yeah, he's a very good tennis player himself, and thankfully he lives in the same geolocation as I, so at least get some more time to meet him once in a while. And he lives in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, Raleigh's a beautiful place. Does he coach in Raleigh?
No, no. So he lived actually in Greenville, North Carolina. I stayed always Raleigh because most people don't know Greenville, North Carolina.
Yeah.
He was at Eastern Carolina University, did his master there, and he was part of the hitting group with the team there. They had a tennis team at ECU, but that team over COVID got canceled out. So he, unfortunately, he doesn't play a lot of tennis anymore at the moment and can't teach. Hopefully his son picks it up. He has a 2-year-old now.
Florian, did you find your way to the U.S. through college tennis too?
No, I did not. I found my way via my professional career. I may have, if I, at the time where I was to make that decision, I would have probably said, okay, can you find a really good D3 from a, academic point of view? But I was like, well, I'd rather go to school, find a job in Germany and be playing locally. That was at the time, the decision. Being then 2 years later, my brother be at a college D1. I was like, maybe you should have tried, but he was for sure also on a different level than I was at the time.
Yeah, our conversation goes so many different directions. Tennis in Europe, tennis in the United States. How many years have you been in the U.S. now?
I've relocated here 2014, so I'm going on 12 years. So I've seen a lot of U.S. tennis by now. Been at a lot of tournaments. Yeah, so that's basically where I've been the last 12 years. I got married here, and I feel more American now than I feel German.
We spoke about this. I know you went through certifications and you have some different coursework for coaching. Can you elaborate on that a little bit on what that was like over in Europe when you went through that and give us some background on that?
Yeah, absolutely. In Germany, you have 3 licenses that you do. It's a C, B, and A license, basically. The C is really mostly your, let's say, local club, basics, early childhood, but you have to go through a certification process of it. You need to understand the techniques, you need to understand grips, and etc. So it's not just here's a 2-hour course on health and safety and welcome, you're a tennis coach. So it's a good week and a half in-person program. Then you go on to the B license, which is typically a multi-week process. That is, if you aspire to later become a professional coach, leads you to the A license. But at the B license, you have to start really understand also the concept of training a professional athlete, or to at least build a path towards that. You learn biomechanics and so on and so forth. And yeah, I was lucky enough that I always enjoyed the game of playing, but somehow I always had a coaching mindset in my head. I was analyzing things. I read books, and so the C license was more a thing of great. You can make some money while you are in school. So that was the first part of becoming a coach. But the B license, I was actually able to be at the time the youngest in Germany that was entered into a program like that, because the federation coach of one of the areas invited me into it. Typically, you needed to be older, but because I was interning there, they allowed me to do it. So I got a sniff on higher end coaching a lot earlier than others might have been allowed to. So that was lucky, but that's that. And then really the A license is really for higher end, high performance and so on and so forth, which you only do if you have an idea of full-time coaching and maybe academies and so on, which I then chose not to do, even though I could have, because I was going to school and college and all of that got in the way of that next step.
Florian, so many questions to ask, but here's the most common, one of the most common, going way back to when Andy Roddick won the U.S. Open.
Yep.
But since that, I understand that Del Potro is the only male who's not from Europe who's won a major. What do you think the difference is between, why so many great champions from Europe and we're behind when it comes to winning majors?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big question. I think having been in the US for 12 years now, I see a lot of potential reasons, right? It's just my viewpoint. But I think one major difference is that in the US, you always play the same style of component and also the same style of coaching against you. You also play typically on the same surface, maybe a little bit on clay, but typically it's hard court. In Europe, I mean, you can, if you want to, you can play against a Swiss guy, a French guy, a Belgian guy, a British guy, a Swedish guy, in the matter of one summer. Not just by playing international tournaments, but just going into a different country and just sign up for a tournament. And I think that always adds different exposure to different coaching styles and different techniques, but also different tactics on how someone approaches the game. I think that's a big difference. If I remember, I played some international tournament where I played against an Italian. The first set I lost 1-6 because he played with a Western grip, and that ball was bouncing so high that I've never even understood what is happening here. I ended up winning, but I still remember that until the first set, I was completely stunned by why is this guy playing with this crazy grip. So I think that has a difference in your early development is that you just don't play against the same style of tennis all the time. Another big reason for me is I think a lot of areas in Europe you have multiple sports and you don't dedicate to one sport as early. So I think there is a different hunger than at some point for the Europeans to get to the top because you didn't spend your early years chasing something and then you have nothing to add on to, if that makes sense. What I mean with that is my brother never practiced more than 4 times a week until he was 14, and he still made it into D1 college. And he also never really practiced more than 2.5 hours a day. But he had a base of basketball. He played and it's just a different. I think the upbringing of all of that is different. So you're building different physique, different ideas, and to some extent maybe also different sets of mindsets by going through that process. And I know everybody talks about Sinner, but yeah, he also just really started with 14 of going a different route. Now that might be an exception, but I think there is something to that it's the early focus versus the later focus combined with playing against different players. And I still personally believe the biggest difference is, and that's the last thing I say on this question, is the clay courts make it a different ball game, in my opinion, in point development, point structure, longer rallies, and to some extent you're less vulnerable to the physical differences that of course happen in junior tennis.
No, there's so many great points that you've made. I've always said that, the Europeans from central and the northern parts, they can all ski, skate, play soccer, which is so, so important. It is true on a hard court. I think of the Jimmy Connors line, you can just slap the ball around. But clay, I think you go to a college tennis match, you can almost guess what kids have a clay court background. With that being said, I mean, I was telling a young boy today, I said, just the drill that we tell you all the time, 100% with your feet, 50% with a racket, just stay back and don't be trying to slap winners from all over the court. We tell people no winners at all, or then the next step is you can only win the point when you're up at the net.
Yeah, Florian, another big difference, right? I mean, cities like we're in, or many metropolitan areas, the cities become kind of divided, right, in pockets. and kids don't interact. And but talk to us a little bit about your experiences with that you might have and your knowledge of club tennis in Germany, and how you think that factors into pride, loyalty, and just overall effect it has.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's nothing better than the club season for me in my childhood. You get the sense of a club feeling. So just to explain, you have under 14s, under 16s, under 18s, and you have your adults, and then you have over 30, over 40. So similar to the USTA, but it goes from a local to a regional to an overarching German thing. But it creates an environment where you actually get to know someone versus, as you say correctly, that's something I've never understood in the US. There's this protectionism around your players. Oh, I don't want them to go play over there because I don't want him to. And that was something that I encountered, as you know. I taught a couple of kids here in the US, and I was so stunned by hearing that. Like, oh no, we really don't want them to go over there. And so in the club tennis in Germany, it's really, you get to know a lot of different players. You get to play also a different level every week. You could play, if you're playing in the men's teams, if you're a 14-year-old, sometimes you play a 40-year-old, sometimes you play a 16-year-old, and sometimes you play against a regular same age 16-year-old. What it does is it creates a little bit more of a unique environment where there's competition, but after you actually, it's a common thing that you sit together and you have a lunch or a dinner, and that is part of the routine. So you compete, but then you actually get to also socialize a little bit. And if I think about that from a tennis perspective and with the club tennis, you get always a sense of humility from it, because typically there's someone coming that you're like, oh wow, he was like way better than any of us. Sometimes these clubs bring in, if they want to go up a league, so that's part of the. It's not one league; it's a little bit like in the soccer leagues. You have the first league, the second league, third, and so on. And every year you're competing. If you're winning your division, you go up a league. So sometimes some clubs would bring in a guy from Bulgaria or Romania or Russia for $2,000, which for us always was like, how is that possible? But yeah, so you would get humiliated 6-0, 6-0 sometimes by like some player, but you don't get that in a sense of fake competition. It's just, okay, well, that's what tennis is. And you later sit together with those guys and you get to learn, well, what do you do? And I think it's a different approach to understanding what the game teaches you, and the perspective keeps widening as far as how big this world is and how competitive it is. I think that's a big thing for the juniors, and as an adult, it just creates a bit more fun than, as you say, the separation of the cities. Yeah, that's how I would put it mostly as to what impact it had on me personally, but I think that has a big impact on many players as well.
Oh, that paints a very good picture. To add to that, my son Connor, when I think he was 15, he played on a men's team, first, second, third, fourth. I think it was the fourth league. It was a fairly respectable level for a 15-year-old to be playing on a men's team. But it creates many things. One, maturity to practice with men. You're playing for something bigger than yourself, not like mom and dad are there. And then the other thing is stage fright. People come out and watch those club matches, and you said it so well, as your team gets to move up a league if you win, but you move down. And I think most of the leagues are still the same. You have two Auslanders, you have two foreigners. But I think, the social aspect, when someone plays really high level tennis here in American, they're good enough to play college tennis. So that means they're a very good player. I mean, there's almost 5,000 colleges, but if they're playing, say, at a Division I school, and I mean, there's some Division III schools can be Division I, but they're playing at a respectable level of tennis. When they're done, if they don't play pro tennis, there's nothing for them. They just go out and start whacking golf balls. But I think that is a positive with the UTR and then the PTTs, where kids now they want to play tennis part time, and it's a spin-off of the European system. One of my son's teammates, Blas Rola from Slovenia, I ended up in his hometown at a junior tournament, and I just thought, okay, this is how he grew up. And the indoor carpet was really worn, really slick, and of course, then the red carpet outside. Tell us a little bit about playing on carpet indoors.
Yeah, that is for sure a very interesting experience when you are playing on the red clay and then the winter sets in and all of a sudden no ball bounces at all. I think the carpet is a unique experience in you get to understand how important footwork is. That at least was always for me. The first week we would typically stand inside the baseline and we would literally just hit balls fast front and back through the middle because you needed to get a completely different hitting point in. I don't think that is so different between the clay court and the hard court, but on carpet, the ball literally just doesn't bounce. It's probably higher bounce than on a grass court, but it really forces you to be extremely good at your fundamentals, in my opinion. Your return, if you try to swing, forget it. That ball is gone. If you think you can miss a split step, well, that's a winner for the opponent. And it also forces you, in Europe at least, that at some point on clay, you can win without learning how to come to the net. But on the carpet, if someone can come to the net, you will lose with your clay court style. So for me, I think the big difference there is that because the game on carpet is so fast and so different, you are almost forced to change your entire makeup of a tennis player from the summer to the winter. And I typically played better on clay because I can run and keep the ball in play. But somehow my best wins were actually in carpets because I don't necessarily because of skill, but because of the opponents not being able to adjust to the difference in surface well enough. And so that creates a unique environment, I think, for fundamental skills because you just can't wing it. It's just not possible. And it forces you to change your behavior as a player to win a match. And if you look at sometimes also at the winners of the winter nationals in Germany and the winners of the summer nationals, there's many times different names, which in the USDA, I don't think that's happening too often, that between summer and winter, you have a different guy winning the nationals in under 14s, under 16s, and under 18s. Typically the same guys in the same year, at least what I've been seeing. In Germany, at least while I was growing up, that could change based on if it was indoors or outdoors. So I think that's part of another piece of development that you do on carpet.
No, and in hearing that, of course, in the U.S., like say even in Texas, for example, many of the clubs, like Brookhaven, such a beautiful place, has clay courts, but there's not that many events on clay. Here in Florida, you certainly can play a fair amount of tournament tennis on clay courts, hard true. But going back to Blas Rola, he's somebody who won the NCAAs but adaptability, I think now that everyone's pretty much using the same currency, that's one less factor. You go from country to country and you just have to change currency. But, an American kid, they're going to, get off the airplane. It's Hertz or Avis rent-a-car. Then they're going to go to Holiday Inn or Embassy Suites. And then they're going to go to, IHOP for breakfast or Chipotle for lunch. It's like they are going from city to city, but it's the same thing, coast to coast, 3,000 miles. So, it is too much of the same.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I loved hearing that. And when you were talking about that with contrast, I kept thinking of Boris Becker and his style of play and winning on grass at such an early age with such limited exposure to actual grass That contrast, I believe, was probably a huge catalyst in him. And never won a clay court event, though. Isn't that correct, Steve Becker?
Correct.
Right, on the pro level.
Yeah,
Level.
on the pro level. Yep. Yeah, you spend a lot of time on the court at the club we're at and the program. And what would you say overall about? I know it's been a while since you've been back full swing in Germany, but parenting. Any advice for parents in regard to your experience with them in the U.S. versus Europe, and things as a coach that you think you can spread to parents that might help them?
Yeah, I think, how much time do we have? No, there's many. I think there's extreme differences on the involvement of the parents on many levels. Let's start, maybe the biggest difference for me is the concept that I call net court time. And what I mean with that is, how many hours do you spend on the court, but how many of those are productive? And I think in the US, if you want to build a program and you don't offer 5-6 hours on court time, you probably won't have a lot of people showing up because, oh, my kid's not working enough hours and they're not playing enough and they don't get enough balls and all of that. In Europe, I think most programs that I've seen, and I've been at places like Sanchez Casal and all of others, I don't think there's more on-court time than 3 to 4 hours max on a given day. I barely seen 5-6 hours, but it's part of and you guys know better than I in the US, but part of the problem is, if you would tell a parent 3 hours is enough, they probably are going to be in a different academy 2 weeks later, because there they say, well, you're going to hit the ball for 6 hours on court. And I think that's part of the reason why the overall, sometimes I think the parents are more focused on hours than they are on what, like I said, I call it net court time, because I think the European players know they're only going to practice for 3 hours, and therefore they go all out, versus to some extent, of course, after a certain amount of time, a kid's tired. And so how much do they really in that moment spend? But they also know that the parents are going to push them, that you have to work 6 hours straight. So I think that's my first big observation, is that the number of on-court hours is different, and it's definitely pushed by the parents, in my opinion. The second is, and I think that's a global phenomenon, but I've never seen it as strongly as here, is how the parents think that YouTube can give you a tennis coaching license. And I mean, I've seen it at Brookhaven, I've seen it at other places, I've seen it with my own experiences. All of a sudden, the child comes in and it's like, yeah, my dad showed me that I should be maybe holding the racket like that, because that's how Federer does it. And I think here in the US, to some extent, coaches have to deal with that. And in Europe, the answer would just be, okay, well, if you want to coach your kid yourself, go ahead. What I mean with that is that the respect sometimes for the profession of the tennis coach, I think, is not the same. I give you one personal example that I had is when I started playing more, my technique, of course, had flaws because I was not taught correctly, but I was really working hard. And at some point, my coach, who has a Polish background, was just yelling at me for missing 3 overheads at a time, which I got upset with because I was working very hard. So I complained to my parents about it. And they said, well, why don't you go talk to the coach? And so I did. And that was how we built a better foundation. I think that here in the US, the parents do the conversation when you as the coach have maybe been a bit more rough for good reasons or not reasons. But the parents shield, in my opinion, the kids much more from the honest conversations with the coaches than they do in Europe. I don't think that any kid in the Czech Republic, which I still think is the best tennis teaching country in Europe, will ever be allowed to come with the statement, oh, my parents told me this is how Federer hits the ball. I think the Czech player will not be in that program anymore. And I think that's the 3 things that stand out to me the most. And I think partially that's because of how much money is available in the US. So it's just a matter of, well, I'm paying you, so I'll teach the rules. Versus in Europe, it's many times, at least in Spain, I've seen it. I've been fortunate enough to live in Paris, so I've been able to watch a lot of times at the federations there. That's not a conversation. There's not even parents around most of the time. The kids come and go. So that's what I would say is three things. Not sure if that resonates with you guys, but that's what stands out a lot for me in the process.
Oh, you're touching on so many great points. For the American kid or the parent is listening to this, you're growing up on hardcore. You got to use your imagination. I mean, to tell people, you need to be able to play some patterns. A young kid I worked with played at Northwestern, Raleigh Smith. I remember just telling him he was a young kid. He said, "You have no patterns. You just play one way." I mean, very, very good competitor, great fighter. And then we had try to have him play with his opposite hand against lesser players, younger players, and he was still so competitive. But do you serve and volley occasionally? Do you take a second serve and come in? Do you play a conventional approach volley? Do you arc a ball and bring your opponent to the net? But it's usually, as you said earlier, just bang bang. It's the same style playing against the same style. There's so many things. In Germany or throughout Europe, tennis is really countrified, where that's not cityfied, where there's tennis is played in small towns. Not so much. No, it's not so much in the U.S. But I think even transportation. I like to ask kids questions that kind of give them a knee-jerk reaction. Do you have a library card? You can go check out a tennis book. You don't have to buy the book. Or have you ever ridden on a city bus? And they kind of look at you. I can remember not too long ago, I took 25 kids from 9 countries to Dusseldorf. And I had one super intern, and I said, "Hey, they're not going to figure out the train system. I know everyone pretty much speaks English, but that makes people certainly more independent." Another thing is there's so many tournaments. I mean, did this unfold for you and your brother when you're growing up, that you took a train and you played a tournament and you actually slept on the indoor courts?
I had an experience where I was at a tournament. I camped out in the bathroom, or let's say the locker room of the club. Yes, that is correct. Yes. Yeah. Because I won an extra round and my parents were supposed to pick me up, but they couldn't. So yeah, I had a sleeping bag, and that's where I slept that one night. Yes, that happened. I think you're actually making a point that I forgot to mention. I think what you're saying in terms of the transportation, it's an independence level, but also a level of discomfort that, having seen how it works in the US, you made the point about, you're going into the next restaurant, which is Chipotle, then you sleep in the Hampton Inn, and then you go into the next city, which is a 4-hour flight away, and it's the same thing. Everybody speaks English, everybody has the same menu, so you can do whatever you want as a routine. If you do that in Germany, well, your next hotel room is somewhere in France. Nobody speaks English, and the food menu is, completely different. And so I think from the maturity part, that definitely adds to the skills that maybe some of the US kids, by lack of their fault, but just how the makeup of the country is, don't even get to experience, right? Sure, Alabama is different than Boston, Massachusetts, but the language is the same. The Hampton Inn is the same. So I think you made a very good point there of skills that are taught by that. And lastly, I think part of that is that I think the parents also look at tennis to teach skills in terms of life skills versus saying you're building a professional athlete. I think the professional athlete thing comes later if you show promise. But I mean, we all know the Federer stories. We all know the Nadal stories. We all know the Sinner stories, right? There was no professional athlete in the making at 9 years old. And I think in the US, there's probably more professional athletes in the making, according to the parents, at 5 years old. that's maybe the one topic that I would add with how you brought up the traffic and the traveling.
The summers in the South, places like where you're living, the two of you in Dallas, it's quite warm. It's like a sauna here in Florida, ditto. But I can remember I lived in a van for 2 years. It was just a great time as well. Different view, different neighbors every day. But anyway, beating the rent. There was a time where I had to leave my van. It was in Hollywood, Florida. It was David Park. I remember I played with an English guy, and it's like no problem. We just slept on the cement floor in the locker room.
Yep.
There's so many stories like that with my two boys. They have a great mom, but I just remember saying, "No, we'll get a van. We'll live in a van." And it's like no, 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 no. I've run many tennis camps. I've run some here in the U.S. It's really interesting. I don't want to sound like I'm just beating up on American parents, but I said, no, we're gonna cut the hotel bill and we're gonna sleep on the courts. And what do you mean sleep on the courts? Of course, in Europe, it's you don't have to have air conditioned courts. I mean, you can get through it, but if you had to sleep out on a tennis court that didn't have air conditioning in the South, it'd be a few dehydrated tennis players. But yeah, no, I just think there's so many things. Yeah, I'm always telling parents it's not that much more expensive, but I've had kids that have won, say, national 12s. Be right up there. I mean, if they didn't win it, they're in the top 5. And I just love the European 14 and under circuit.
Oh yeah.
You just think of places, country tennis is not in the U.S. It's not countrified. There's great players that come from everywhere, but it's not like, okay, we got Wyoming, we got Montana. You just think, you start in the north and you have the Scandinavian countries, and you come down and you have the Benelux countries, and you get down towards Western Germany, and you're by Belgium and Holland, and France isn't so far away. And now it's not all good, but it's amazing how many American kids finding their way to European commercialized, Americanized tennis academies. And when I'm always telling them, no, you don't go to Europe to go to an academy. You go to Europe to play. Go to Europe to play tournaments. Tell us, but why don't you go a little bit more in depth on why you think the Czechs are so good? I've said that. I was fortunate to be over there in '87. But yeah, tell us a little bit about tennis in the Czech Republic, or I should say, go back to Slovakia, Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I would say why I think that is they focus fundamentals, and the depth of the quality of the coaches is just tremendous. I can only speak to many experiences I had getting to know coaches and so on, and the level that they had at the early childhood level was just tremendous. And I think that would be my main point. Is they have a program that just teaches the fundamentals of the game, the techniques of the game so solidly that talent isn't, what is the right word for that? Talent isn't wasted at the lowest level. Like I will say, I think my level of tennis could be better if I wouldn't have to start learning how to hit a forehand right at the age of 13, 14. I'm convinced that 90% of the Czech tennis players will have the correct grip, whether they have been really good or not, but they've been taught correctly, which means they have a path to go wherever they want to take their tennis. And I think that for sure in the US, but also very much so in Germany, there's so many coaches that are supposedly coaches, but the kids are just not taught correctly, and therefore they can't go necessarily the ways they want to go. That would be number one on the Czech. But then also, if you see the depth, especially on the women's side, there is a mix, in my opinion, of the old Soviet Union drill sergeant, and then the ease of the Southern European way of living. That for me is the biggest reason why I say it's both. They have, to some extent, the ease of, okay, well, it's 3:00. Let's sit down and just talk a little bit about tennis. To, okay, it's 5 a.m. in the morning, do 300 push-ups, and then you run until you throw up, basically. And I think it's a unique combination that I've not seen in any other countries, where you can go from, Soviet Union drill style to totally relaxed and chilled. And I think you see that with the professional tennis players coming out of that country. They are hard workers, nose to the grind, right? Run and fast. And then they are some of the most funny and relaxed humans if you actually spend time understanding who they are off the court, which is a rare case in my opinion. So I think all of those three feed in why is my statement, why I think Czechoslovakia is the best teaching for tennis at this point.
No, that's so insightful. The Czechs, 1954, Drobny won Wimbledon, and the Soviets wasn't, the big red machine, the Iron Curtain. Tennis wasn't an Olympic sport between 24 and 84 or so. But the Czechs, tennis was not suppressed. Just like, say, with communism, the Catholic churches in Cuba became government buildings. Yeah, they showed great resistance. And of course, there wasn't a lot of love lost between the Czechs and the Russians. Tell us a little bit about being in Paris. That's an amazing place for tennis.
Well, yeah, I got lucky that my company sent me for an internship to Paris. So I was working, but I only lived away from the tennis center, about, Roland Garros and all of that, where the young kids typically practice. Three to four stations on the subway. So yeah, I got Saturdays off in Paris. So what do you do? Yeah, you go watch tennis, right? at the different centers. So I got to actually visit there by just watching and just sitting and seeing them playing. Which of course, for those that don't know how France works, France is maybe the biggest country in terms of tennis that at an early age brings the best of the best into one central location. As obviously you and Dave and all of those familiar with the system there know, but what it really creates is for you as a watcher, it's a unique opportunity to see how the coaching changes from top level 14s, top level 16s, top level 18s. And for me, that was fascinating because I think it's the only place in the world, unless of course you go to one of the, as you say, commercialized ones. But in France, you could see a game of this hitting with a 12-year-old, and that's fully okay for him. I've witnessed that. I've seen a game of this hitting with a 12-year-old, and it was fully okay for Monfils, and he was working his best off. And he was fine. Afterwards, he sits and talks to the 12-year-old, and then he moves on and hits with somebody else. I think for me, that was just a unique experience. And Coach Dave and I talk about that a lot, is the hesitancy sometimes of parents to accept that you hit a level down or two levels down, or, maybe you do practice with EC at this point just to show them that sometimes doesn't exist in the US. And I think it's a unique place in Paris where you see the highest level, but each and every level is fully okay in hitting one or two or even sometimes three levels down. So for me, that was a very unique experience from a tennis perspective, because you always think you have to hit with your same level or hit up. But here was one of the best at that time 20-year-olds in the world hitting three levels down. So for me, that was extremely interesting to see and telling also from the coaching mentality, right? You need to say to I don't know what game of his was at 20 years old, but probably one of the best prodigies in tennis at that time. Okay, you go onto the court with the 12-year-old. That takes a little guts, right? As a coach in the US, in Paris, that was standard.
Yeah. No, we're always telling kids not to be tennis snobs. And, a more skilled player, the superior player in skills, always telling them if the other person misses, the inferior player, it's the superior skills. It's your fault. Put the ball on a dime. The two Daves, Dave Howell and Dave Fish with the UTR. Dave Howell copied it was a spin-off of the French system. He did the math and got it established. But Dave Fish, the former Harvard coach, is when it really launched the UTR. It was nonprofit. Larry Ellison, one of the richest people in the world, was sponsoring it. But it became commercialized. Now they have the largest email list in tennis, and there's certainly some positives with the UTR. There's some negatives. It was supposed to be genderless and ageless. So everybody plays everybody. And back in the day in the U.S., back in the 70s, in Florida, for example, you had to win 2 B tournaments to play an A tournament. You'd be in a B tournament, be a 14-year-old and a 54-year-old, and it could be men and women. You'd show up at the park and you'd play whoever. And now we don't really have the youth versus veteran matches anymore either. The NTRP, which has been a very, very good moneymaker, especially for indoor tennis, league tennis, adult tennis. Even our age group tournaments now in the U.S. Used to have to qualify. I remember qualifying nationally for the 25s. That doesn't even exist anymore. But you had to play throughout your section. You had to do well in your section to be able to qualify for nationals. Now, all the age groups in America, you can just sign up and go. If you want to go play the national 45s, you just call up and enter. So it's so many things have changed.
Florian, Coach, if you could talk about, you mentioned the Czech System, and when you came on board, our team of coaching here at the club, and one of the things we do with onboarding, as you know, you went through it, and to date, you were the fastest person. You completed the Tennis Intelligence Applied course that is a part of the GreatBase, curriculum, quicker than anyone. You ate it up. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, being, kind of throwing the information, what it meant to you? I saw the excitement level in you. I saw how you were just keen on, number one, applying it in your own game and utilizing it with others. But just kind of share a little bit about that, because it was really fun for me to see.
Yeah, I'm glad you saw. Yeah, I think what really stood out for me is the clear structure of how you go from fundamentals to applied, but breaking it down into the simple steps of how to develop a swing. And what resonated the most with me and why I went through it so fastly was that I always, when I started coaching at 16 years old with no really experience, anything, I always said tennis is taught way too complex. That why are we making this so difficult when at the end of the day, a serve is throwing a ball, right? And I was kind of reminded of my early coaching things with the little kids, of like thinking through on school buses driving home. How do I teach someone in a simple way this thing that looks so complicated, but it actually isn't that complicated? And going through the program, that's how I felt, here's the blueprint for that. You learn how to develop the swing, you understand the mechanics of it. And from there, you actually start building how do you want to coach that. And I think you get to some extent, let's say, a little bit of an IKEA handbook, I called it, for the things that you otherwise try to figure out in super slow motion and all these other videos, but it's explained. That stood out to me because I feel like every time when someone on a different voice breaks down a swing, there's always something you learn. At least I do. Every time I listen to you on the lessons, or I listen to someone else on TV, and so there's something you can think from. But typically it's a one moment in time situation. And what I liked is you could go back to it because it's videoed, right? You can be in the section about what do you do with 6 kids on the court, which resonated again with me a lot because in Europe, that's many times the standard. You have to practice and give lessons when you have 6 kids on the court. Versus in the US, many times people only know private. So long story short, for me, it was both interesting from the makeup because it has a very European makeup of how you build from basic fundamentals to more complex and highly applied things. And on top, while you're going through that, there's also the way of what should you as a coach be doing. I think the biggest telling for me is the parts about the video logs. And I keep saying, I wish I was ever videotaped. And I think I was videotaped on my own technique maybe 2 times in my whole upbringing. And I'm like, well, I've videotaped my own kids that I coach more often than that. But I think the clear commitment to videoing and micro teaching and so on stood out for me the most. And that's why I spend so much time in it, because the moment you then go film yourself and you can check back against the explanation, mostly from Steve, right, on those videos, I think you have a toolbox that you can build from your own ways of what you've learned, how you've played, and then you can go back and forth on against something that you've filmed. And I think that's different to many of the other, let's say, programs or live teachings also. You just don't have it in video form most of the time. You have it written down on a notepad, but the chance to just scroll back to, okay, what was this again with the swing on the double-handed, two-handed backhand? I think that makes a huge difference. And for me, it was quite interesting because I could film myself on hitting something and then go back, okay, let's see how I do. So that was exciting to me. And mostly what like I said, what stood out is I was reminded to, here's the blueprint that I was trying to build for myself at 16, 17 years old, trying to make it simpler for kids to learn how to play this sport.
Oh, that's great input. Let me go back to Tennis Intelligence Applied for our listeners. There's a course on our website, greatbasetennis.com. It's 365 clips. It's 25 hours. They're all about 5-minute clips. The late Andy Brandy, he said Neil Anderson. So Dave said you went through it so fast. Neil Anderson played for 8 years in the Chicago Bears backfield with Walter Payton. He ended up not too long after he got connected to working with us, Neil Anderson. And how it happened is that he played football at the University of Florida. Andy Brandy was coaching tennis at the University of Florida. So Andy sends him our way, and 3 months in a row, he came and worked. Came in like for 3 or 4 days, and he left, came back, three times. And each time he watched the course, 25 hours. And then the third time he came back and he smiled and he said, Steve, I want to tell you, your system, of course, it's not my system. It's a system of systems. It's certainly homework. He looked at me, he smiled, he said, it's not going to work. I said, I know exactly why. Because people won't work. It's amazing. I think of Joey Johnson. He's got a book, Worthy to Win. I would consider Joey to be a student through his son, Spencer, who started working with us at 10, 11 years old. But then his brother, Spencer's uncle, Jimmy, he was a classmate of David's. So over the years, Joey has sent so many students to work with me. And the first thing I ask him is, have you read Joey's book? And they say, no. I said, you're working with him. He's told you to come out here and you haven't even read his book. We have people, when they come in, we put them through a tiebreaker test and they'll come back and I'll just ask them, since you were here last time, did you do the tiebreaker test? I even tell, which is just hitting 6 balls to targets. And, a lot of times kids are, they're ranked quite high in their section, their province here in North America, and they lose 07. And, I just ask them, have they looked at the videotape? So I think, here in the U.S., kids are overfed. It's too many lessons, too many groups, too many training hours, and lack of independence. I think kids are given roots, but their families really love them, but do they really have wings?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on what you just said, the old D.K. Pearson, hungry dog hunts best. And I think that a lot of kids and families go through tennis kind of like a person punching a time clock. I wrote down a couple of words to describe Coach Florian. Student at a game, And then these two critical P's. He has passion and positive energy. And, it's every morning that we're together at 6, it's always interesting because, it's genuinely the same kind of group of kids that we have and we see around that time. And the energy that coach has is because he has 90 minutes on a good day. And it really kind of goes back to what you were saying about some of the situations in Europe and not having, the abundance of courts and or court time. And after Rybakina won Wimbledon, and anybody can pop her up on Wikipedia, right? But I've read this to the class numerous times, how in her Wikipedia that she, was limited on court time to a couple hours a day, and therefore she was pushed into the gym for 2 to 3 hours a day to make things work. And that up until age 16, she was in a group of 8. And that was her training group. It was nothing individual. And then 16 to 18, a group of 4. So really not receiving any individual time. And I think of the hungry dog. We are in a world where people are just so overfed, and it's hard to make warriors out of that. It's very difficult.
Very quickly, DK Pearson, story's been told on the podcast before, but he comes to this program we have at Tyler Junior College, Tyler, Texas. And it was unfortunate. I was there during the span of 3 different coaches. And this happened with the first coach. And we had a 15-hour lab, and it was just awkward where, our players were, or initially his players, Joey Johnson being one of them, would ask me questions. And then when the players were in class, so they were deprived of academic freedom. They were told they couldn't be on the team and be in the tennis tech program. So DK Pearson loves tennis. He comes down to Texas, Illinois, I believe. And he went to a school in Iowa. Could have that backwards. But so he comes down and it's like, no, sorry, kids, you can't have a tryout. You can't play. And at that time we had 8 courts at the bottom, 4 courts at the top. And I said, you can practice all day long. And I said, you'd be here for 2 years, learn how to, teach tennis, coach tennis at a high level. And then when you leave here, you'll have 3 years to play. So he leaves. And by that time, the coach who deprived him of the opportunity, he had left. And so they end up at a NAIA match. And I remember DK Pearson, he played Peter Dixon, who was a really nice player. And he beat Peter 6-3, 6-3. So Peter was on a scholarship and played the 2 years that DK was not allowed to even practice. But one nice thing about that is Peter Dixon, he joined the program to take classes on tennis teaching. But yeah, that's a great story, the hungry dog. And actually, it was a bonus in disguise. It's like, no, don't worry about your game, or don't worry about playing on the team. Just work on your game for 2 years. And if people understand player development, 2 years is a blink of an eye. Most people quit tennis, they haven't really even started. It's a lifelong sport. You think, well, gee, you're only, you're still a teenager and you're ready to hang it up. Florian, tell us what you do professionally.
Yeah, I professionally work as a site leader as 2 manufacturing sites for a Belgian multinational company that I oversee. So I always jokingly say I'm responsible for making sure that 1,000 people do what they're supposed to do on a daily basis. That's what I do. That's my corporate hat. So in general management, in operations for a larger multinational company. Yeah. But there's lots of tennis that goes into that job many times from skills that came from tennis. So,
that was my next question. That's my next question. Your upbringing in tennis. Why don't you just elaborate? How does that help you with what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, Coach Dave knows. I always say jokingly that one day I'll write a book about that. And I think parents have many times this idea why they have kids learn tennis. And I mean, there's not one day where I go out of here and tennis hasn't helped me with something in my career. I think the biggest thing that tennis has taught me that you have 30 seconds to reset. You have 30 seconds that you hear about someone that just had a safety incident, or someone, the machine broke, or here's this and that. I mean, it doesn't matter the situation, but my mind literally works like that. And we all know why, right? You have 30 seconds the next point, or you're going to lose the next point. And I still to today say, I thank my parents for having me going through that ordeal of losing matches where you just self-destruct, right? Because you can't get your act together, that you just missed the forehand wide and you get more upset and you miss another forehand wide. And there's many times when I sit here in the office and something bad happens and it's, okay, 30 seconds are over. All right, what we're going to do now? Okay, let's work on the solution. And I think for business, that's been for me the best thing that tennis has taught me. For private life as well, but in the professional sense, I think that's something that you don't take for granted, because many people, as on the tennis court, not everybody can let go of a lost point or a lost opportunity. That's that. I think secondly, tennis teaches you that to some extent your success depends on how much work you put in. I think that in many other sports, you can swim along with a very good team, right? You don't have to be the best soccer player on a soccer team to win a national championship, right? Or win a club tournament or anything like that. You won't win the club tournament in tennis if you're not trying very hard. That's something that I feel like over the course of my career, I've many times been put in positions where I was younger than the majority of the people that maybe would have been put in those situations. But I feel like I made it through those tests of the business world because I'm like, well, I'm just going to outwork anybody that shows up. And one of the things that I did early on in my professional career, and I think it's also related back to tennis, is that at an early age, I said, okay, well, I'm 26, and most of the people that I compete against, I was in sales at the time, relocating from Germany to the United States. And I said, okay, here comes the 26-year-old, and he's talking to the 45-year-old veteran, which is basically nothing else than you say, okay, well, here comes an opponent. How do you win on a tennis match where the opponent is more experienced? And what I did is I said, well, I probably will need a coach helping me. How do I get better at everything at 26 that those veterans have? And I think the attitude just comes from the decency that tennis gives you, that there's always somebody better and that someone as a coach helps you. That's number 3. And then the last thing I say is the scoring system. Many times I will make tennis references in business situations. Say, well, I guess we're 0-5 in the third. We better get our act together now. But I think the big difference with the tennis scoring system is there's not many sports where you lose more often than you win, and yet you can still be really good. And I think that's when we come back also speaking about parents, right? I think that is something the parents don't understand. I didn't understand for sure when I was younger, but in the business world, I've never had so many reflections on thank you tennis, basically, because, okay, well, my record is 13-23. Okay, in the business world, you typically also lose more often than you win. But as a result of you not giving up, you're going to end up winning also. And I think that's a bit how tennis world works, right? That's how also, I mean, if you want to be top 50 in the world, right, you probably have a 50-50 record split. Is that about right?
Yeah.
That's business for you. That's business for you. I could keep going on, but I really think, and that's mostly what I tell parents many times about my own life story with tennis is, it's the best teacher of life skills that I believe there is. I can come up with any situation in my personal life, in my professional life, I mean, Dave, you know how we met, right? It's tennis teaches you to have respect for what people know And to Dave's point, when we met, he had the video and he was breaking it down, and I was probably paying more attention than the kids in the room, because I was like, okay, well, here's someone that knows much more than I, so I should pay attention. And I think tennis is unique in that you will not win a match against someone that's better at something than you or more skilled, unless, okay, they close the roof at the Australian Open when I have cramps or whatever and so forth. That barely happens, right? I think those are the undervalued things that parents don't see, that the kids actually learn, which is, in my opinion, more important than a tennis scholarship at this moment. But they actually go against that by protecting the kids from losing, from being down, from playing up and losing. But also sometimes, I know Dave and I, we talk about this many times, the concept of winning down and clearing that hurdle of, okay, this is an easy task, but I have to master that task to make a level up. You have that in the business world all the time. You have to master something that you feel like you've already mastered, but unless you've done it so well, you will stay exactly at that level for the rest of your career. And I think tennis is one of the things that teaches you that you've cleared a level today, but you need to clear it again tomorrow, versus in many other sports, you sign professional basketball player signs a 5-year contract. It doesn't matter if he still scores 25 points or not. He has that contract and guaranteed money. The tennis player and doesn't. You hear it's my favorite topic, so I'm going to stop here. But I really think it's something that parents don't understand enough as to what the sport teaches you for your success later. And you don't have to be the best of the best tennis player for learning those skills.
No, it's so well put. No one has a crystal ball, but certainly, how someone deals with tennis, after competitive tennis, how are they going to deal with the real world?
Yeah, I mean, I love your perspective on that, Coach, and I hope that everybody listening, especially parents, really take that and put it into their think tank and chew on it a little bit. Coach, let me ask you about your time here in the U.S. coaching, and I know you spent a little bit on the East Coast, and kind of give us just a quick walkthrough of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I came over, and I was fortunate enough that I relocated from a very small town in Connecticut to locate into Boston, Massachusetts. And by lucky circumstance, I met one of my best friends in life still, and he's literally my, I would say, smaller brother. Care for him like a child, like a very at the time 4-year-old kid, extremely talented. And so by any chance I speak with the dad, and the dad goes, well, I was coaching basketball at the time, just for reference, volunteering, because I had a background in basketball coaching as well. So I volunteered, and the dad sits down with me and talks with me about, his son and how it's basketball and so on. And then he mentions, and I have a 4-year-old, and he plays tennis. And I say, oh, he plays tennis. And he goes, yeah. And he's practicing. And I say, oh, well, I know some about basketball, but my passion really is tennis. If you want, we can meet on the court, and I can give you some insights or whatever you want. You take it for what it is. Yeah, turns out to be that little 4-year-old and I will be practicing every Saturday and Sunday morning for the next 5, 6, 7 years until he turns 11, and made it probably into the areas of the top 50 in that age group. And at the time, I wish I would have known Dave already. But that's sometimes how it goes. Well, now he plays in Florida at an academy, and he's making progress. Coach Dave knows him. That's one of the kids that was in that video room. And it was mostly on a 1-to-1 basis, really trying to build up a player that's up in an area where there is not a lot of tennis even though it's Boston, Massachusetts, but he lives 45, 60 minutes from the city, but there's just no infrastructure for tennis. So mostly one-on-one. Through that, I also again, you got to be lucky sometimes. I for sure got lucky with the tennis kids I was able to spend a lot of time with. There's one other girl that's also at that time 4'6", so I got a chance to practice her. She's just the last winter nationals. She was in the top 4, under 12 now, under 12. So just by lucky circumstances, ran into 2 very talented kids that used to be in the same spot. The parents trusted this German guy enough to help with their tennis journey. Yeah, and then I came down here to Texas because my job relocated, and I got to spend some time around local academies, but mostly really trying to play myself. And now I'm lucky enough to have audiences with David. Dave, that was the first time I said David. I think Dave on the court many times at 6 a.m. and hope I can bring some of insights to those kids that are there and just give a different perspective of maybe sometimes an unconventional tennis journey that maybe some parents maybe don't necessarily understand, but I think it resonates a lot with the kids many times. So that's a bit the journey.
Oh, David, I'm glad you asked that. Certainly, New England. I spent a lot of time teaching tennis in New England. Went to prep school in New England. I mean, I just think of Deerfield Academy, Choate Academy, Choate, the prep schools. All American Sports used to rent campuses in the summertime. I'm always telling people from the Northeast where the weather is bad, it could be the same for the kid from Ontario, Quebec, the Midwest. You don't have to play tennis. Look at all the great Europeans. You don't have to play tennis every day. So then because of that, I think that, the kids think, they get their head down and their head in the sand. And it's not that bad, get a basketball, do something to become athletic, find a wall to hit against. And, if you know the backstories with people. Let me just say this is that this happens to me all the time. One of our students, if we get a text, says, hey, we got a kid who's in 11-2 and he wants to play D1 tennis instead of I just want to play tennis. He's tired of that D1, D1, D1. Years ago, and maybe it's still the same, but the European would be able to pick out the American. Just think of the American guy. They're going to be wearing topsider shoes. This goes back many years ago. They're going to have on, khaki pants, the eyes-eyed shirt. They're all going to be dressed the same. And why I say that is, we're the brand society. And some kid in the U.S., if they can't play at a named school, it's like they don't want to play. And, college tennis is only 4 years. College tennis is only 32 weeks a year. And when you're 22 years old, you're not done. That's another benefit of the club system. Yeah. And I think a lot of times kids, they write themselves off. And then also, too, is that, the kid who's in 11-2, why don't you, Vic Braden, you say, why don't you go where you're wanted? Go where you're wanted, and then get in match play. I just think, I have an ice hockey background. There's a lot of great hockey players that, the greater Toronto Hockey League, that they didn't play AAA hockey. They played single A, and, there are those stories that then they moved up to double A, but they weren't a superstar when they were 12. And that's a problem in tennis is, I think Jose Aguirre said well about 12 and under tennis is that somebody has to win with, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, Florian, if you could just give a little bit of background. I know you overcame a lot of adversity with your wife and what she had to go through, but can you tell us a little bit about her and what she had to fight?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my own situation, life situation 2 or 3 years ago got changed a bit by my wife. Yeah, having breast cancer. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So yeah, we had to change our own life plans a little bit, quite significantly. Obviously, we were ready to have kids at the time, and well, as we start trying for that, we find the lumps, right? And so yeah, thankfully she's through all the chemo, surgery. Her body is altered as a result. She can't fix that because by makeup of her physique, she doesn't have too much extra that you can use to correct that. So she had to learn how to live with a different way of looking. And but we made it through all the treatments for over a year. She kept working almost full time. I kept working full time. And just I think again, just saying that thanks to tennis that in the meantime, while I was doing that, I got promoted by my company into the role that I have now. Yeah, not because they were this. It's just I think again, tennis teaches you so many life skills that okay, well, I literally said to my dad at the time when we were diagnosed, and I talked to him about it, and he said, well, how do you feel? I said, well, it's a 5-set match and I'm down 2-0, so I better find out how to win now. That was literally the way I explained it to him, because I couldn't figure out a better way how to put how I felt. But all I knew was it would be a long road to get it done, but we knew we would win. And so, like I said, I can talk about my own life in tennis terms, basically. But that was my personal adversity with my wife. My mother passed away in a tragic accident, unfortunately, when I was 23 years old. So, we had to deal with that as well. But both my brother and I and my dad, we, many times we would cite tennis stories at that time to also get through that story. So, like I said, one day I'll write a book. When Dave has time, we'll put this together. But tennis is the best teacher of life skills. That will be what I will always say, and it helps us, my wife and I, to get through that very difficult time for sure.
No, Dave, thanks for asking that question, and Florian, thanks for the answer. Dave, you used the word perspective earlier. Story of survival. I think of Guga Quirton, the Brazilian poet's so great mentally, emotionally. But his brother passed away many years ago now. But every day, Guga would leave the house, and his brother was bedridden his whole life. Like, how could a guy smile and just have so much fun competing and show that sense of enjoyment? But health is everything. I wrote down from our previous notes. What comes to your mind when I say Kohlschreiber?
Many things. Beautiful one-handed backhand, which Dave knows. I wish I had that return. But I think when I think of Philipp Kohlschreiber, I think of two things: extremely hard worker, always able to learn how do I adjust to what I have in front of me, because he typically would not be more physical. He wouldn't hit the ball harder than anybody else. But he found many ways of winning games and matches. I actually was at one of the matches at the US Open watching him play John Isner with 3 of our fans, and we were the only guys cheering for him. But he managed to beat John Isner at the US Open in multiple tie breaks, basically just holding on to his own serve and then just finding a way to win. So I think that's what Philipp Kohlschreiber to me is from a German tennis perspective. Is underrated, of course, because he never made it, let's say, into levels of a Kiefer or Zverev or any like that. But for what he is physically and what he made out of the disadvantage of the one-handed backhand, I think he's one of the best in figuring out how to overcome disadvantages and finding ways to win. I think that's how I always looked at Philipp Kohlschreiber. And of course, beautiful for one-handed backhand is the first thing. Stan probably has a big extra, but I think he's pretty close to that from an aesthetical point of view.
The founder of our podcast, Andy Fitzel, the question is, does Kohlschreiber look like Andy Fitzel or vice versa? I was at Indy Wells, and most of the time I'm in the trenches with players rebuilding their game. I'm unteaching tennis, not teaching tennis, unteaching tennis. So I'm in the locker room at Indian Wells, and off to the side, it's not the locker room, a lounge, the men's area, and TV. There's lots of tennis to watch. Cole Schreiber and I mean, the two of us just sat there and we were watching Sampras and Agassi. I said, I'll just sit here and watch this. I mean, it's just on TV. It's, it's dated. It was, 10 years past. But Henry Squire, his father's Aussie, David Squire. So I was, I've known him since he was 6 years old. So he's playing the Junior US Open and spending time with him. And of course, the college coaches are all drooling over him, 6'5". And so Henry is hitting with the Germans. He grew up in Germany. As I said, his father's Aussie. But Cole Schreiber beat Zverev. So Henry Squire's in the meeting and said, okay, give me a play-by-play. I say he didn't go to the meeting. The meeting was in German anyway. Ich wünsche, ich verstehe Deutsch, sprechen Deutsch. Anyway, but yeah, they mixed it up. They kept the ball low, but that's, that one-handed backhand is very versatile. I always tell people you just got to stick with it. If you want to be a one-hander, you can be a one-hander, but I think the learning curve, you're not typically playing a one-dimensional game. I had a mom one time, I told the son, why don't you decide whether you want to be a two-hander or one-hander? Because the player really liked to come to the net. To digress, the mom came back and said, well, we thought about it over the weekend, and we think that the return to serve is more important than the approach shot. So the player remained as a two-hander. Tell us about German basketball. They're world champions, is that right?
Yeah, you remember well from our conversation. Yeah, I know we talked about it, and I think that's to some extent the sad part about the German tennis part. What the basketball team has done well for you, Coach Dave. When Steve and I we talked a bit about, and I said, well, what the Germans did with the basketball is they were humble enough to say we have no clue how to teach basketball, so they invited the Yugoslavian, the Lithuanians, the Spanish guys, Americans, whatever it is, into the country. And now the German national team won the European and German and the World Championship back to back, which is almost unheard of in modern basketball. The reason why Steve and I talked about it is that I said the problem in German tennis is that the guys that were there when the Beckers were there are still the same guys running the show in the German Tennis Federation, which is, Steve, at the time, if I remember correctly, you asked me, why do I think that the German tennis has gone down so hard, right? That was, I think, how we got there. Yeah, that was the answer. That was, to me, is the answer. The German tennis is still organized the way it was when there was Becker and Stich. That's all good, but you have to evolve. And I think there's just not enough fresh, modern ideas in how to actually bring someone to the top. But yeah, we're very proud that the German national team won the world and European basketball championship. But funny thing is, the coach is a Spanish guy, and the guy before that taught them to win the the world championship was a U.S. national. So it just shows exactly how that is. When I see the German Fed Cup team and the German Davis Cup team, and I see Michael Coleman sometimes there, and then I think it's Barbara Rittner at the time. Yeah, well, I guess there's not a lot of new influence in German tennis for any time soon. And I think, Steve, remind me if I'm wrong, but we also talked a bit about at that time about that really there's not any players coming through the German federation system. They're all basically coming through private ways, versus before they came through the system, many of them. So that's an unfortunate part, and unfortunately the basketball federation has shown the tennis federation how to do it. Yeah, hopefully they'll learn something.
The GreatBase really started to take form in 1981, where we had this lab for nearly a decade throughout the 80s. But the Germans at one point, what they were doing, there's always politics to everything, but they were just giving money to, of course, this is back when it was West Germany. They were giving money, if the kids were really doing well within their area. I think at that time, 16 states in West Germany. If you're doing well in your state, you would get some funding from the federation. I think too many times the federations are too heavy on administrators, what they're paying out. But going back to basketball, the 92 Dream Team, at one point it was like no one will ever be able to compete with the Americans. I know very little bit about basketball, but Coach K, who just retired from Duke, said around the world people are teaching fundamentals in basketball. Because the term I don't like to hear is that old school. They've gone back to old school. Old school, new school.
Yeah.
There is no school. Here's another German word, kindergarten. And the Germans are climbing the ranks through structure in ice hockey. But what they did is they tested kids, and the number one thing they were looking for is young 6-year-olds who could jump. And then they met with the families and said, if you want to have this particular sport, ice hockey, become a lifestyle, added to the household. But the Germans are climbing the ranks in hockey as well. I got one other question on the Germans. I just think about, okay, the World Cup didn't go so well with when Brazil and Germany didn't go so well for Brazil, but how the Germans play soccer. Why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, sore topic. I think obviously soccer is number one sport in Germany. Right? It's a little bit like if you don't play basketball or football here in the United States or baseball, then what do? You play tennis? Okay. Everybody looks at you with a little, strange eyes. So soccer is the first thing that, of course, every German kid, guy, now also girls, gets in touch with. Is probably also the first sport that the parents may think of. What's interesting about it, I will go away from not answering the question on the World Cup. Obviously, that was maybe one of the best teams of German soccer ever. That team that won the World Championship in Brazil. So yes, I think that was a revolution of German soccer. But what also is funny or interesting enough is that came after a major change in how the scouting system for soccer and how the German Soccer Federation worked on how to bring talent through the ranks and how to actually evolve talent and so on. So many of those players that won that World Cup were very young at the time. If you look at it, was a very young team, but they never really got through. Sorry, I should say they were a young team when they started playing together, but it took them quite some time to get over the hump of winning the World Cup. And since then, that same method hasn't worked anymore, at least for a long time. And I think it goes back a little bit to also some cultural shifts in Germany as to what is competition. I think I told Coach Dave about that, but in some areas of soccer, the kids now don't meet anymore to play a competitive match. They come to play. So means there's no winner or loser until a certain age. I personally think that is not a great idea in the sport. I think there's better ways of teaching that losing isn't a bad thing. I don't think that just letting kids lose at an early age is a good idea. I'm married to a child psychologist, I have many conversations with her about that, but I don't think that taking competition out is a good idea. And I think you're seeing that more and more in many German soccer is, somehow there's a competitive spirit not happening anymore. And I would say that continues in many other areas in German soccer at the moment.
What year was the World Cup played in Germany? 2012?
2006.
2006. Wow, I'm way off. So, yeah, my son Connor, he spent the summer in Germany in 2006, and he certainly can pick up a soccer ball with his feet. Where people think he's just a big time soccer player based on the way he just he just took it upon himself. Okay, I'm going to be able to pick the ball up different ways with my feet. Yeah, I love the World Cup. I think it'd be great
Yeah.
if the Davis Cup, the Fed Cup, was every 4 years, and really everybody really got into it. With
Yeah, that would be a great change.
I think one thing about Germany being a wealthy country, coming back to, I say, Czechoslovakia. I just think going back, combining the two countries, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, it's still a sport. It's not a business. I mean, Germany, like the U.S., is such a wealthy country. Could you comment on, in Germany, there's so many coaches from around the world where, it's almost like Juicy Fruit or Baskin Robbins. There could be too many people to choose from, too many flavors. Could you comment on that? Like, I mean, I know the late Nicky Pilic, he just passed away, but he was the captain of three Davis Cup teams in Croatia, Serbia, and then Germany. And I'm always intrigued to find out what I can about different approaches to developing tennis players. I know you spent a lot of time with Djokovic, but could you comment on what was your experience like? Did you meet coaches from all over in Germany when you were coming up?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned Pilic. Coach Dave knows one of the best experiences I think I had as a young junior is that, as you mentioned, he worked with Djokovic in Munich. Yeah, I think Pilic is, in my opinion, one of the most influential coaches in Germany, for the point that, yeah, he's not German, but he taught the German Davis Cup team, and he was obviously a trusted resource to many foreign players. But I also think he brought into Germany the idea that if you want to bring out the best players for the next generation of tennis, you have to change your ways. And I mean, he brought that academy in Munich, and I still remember there used to be a Nicky Pilic Cup that you could play, and one of them was always in Munich, and I got the chance to see a young Novak Djokovic practice, and I still for today will remember that we looked at, and Djokovic is about 3 or 4 months older than I am, and I was just like, wow, why is it? So the guy was just like, yeah, this is his, and he's saying, oh, and why is he not playing the tournament? Oh, he's preparing for something international and so on. And I'm like, that must be a different level. But the level was not just him. The level was just the relationship with the coach. So yeah, it's very sad that he passed away, but just the level of intensity that Pilic had, just by the aura that he had when he walked off the court, you had respect. It just yeah, I could paint that situation. But to go more into the question, I think you're seeing a lot of different influences, but not as much as you may think. Yes, Germany is a very much of an immigration type country, and there may be different ethnicities and so on. But I think on the tennis side, the influences aren't as diverse as you would think from the background of our society. But I think the main reason of that is that the majority of the immigrants initially came from the Soviet Union. So in tennis, you saw a lot of Soviet Union, Eastern European influence, but not so much an Italian or Spanish or French influence. And I think if you go back in the history of how the German tennis players played, it's a little similar to that. And then I think what's missing is the evolution towards what the influences from Spain, France, or to some extent now Italy would be. So yeah, but it's not very common, at least in my experience, to see a lot of, now it's a different nationalities, but I think the way the tennis game is taught is very similar, unless you're going into some private academies, that there are some smaller ones that I think are really good, where there's a difference of that. There's a different wind there. But in general, I think there's maybe a mix of nationalities, but the way tennis is approached in Germany, I think, is unfortunately not evolving a lot. As you say, money is given at early ages, but it's not pointed towards what are we actually trying to build here. And I think that's why in general in Zverev is not through that system either, and he's privately coached by his dad.
Yeah.
Also Eastern European influence, right? So yeah, it's sad, but I think there's not as much influence, at least as what I have seen, other than the early Eastern European influence.
Oh, Zverev, he's certainly German, but he has the Russian mentality. Yeah, Nicky Pilic, I've heard, he commanded so much respect. I think of Mr. Hopman from years ago, that the players they wouldn't even ask for water. It's just, it's like, we're not going to get water till he tells us to get water. But just the work ethic. Yeah, let's wind this down. Let's go with a few more questions. Dave, what do you got?
Well, not really a question, but I guess it is a question. Do you want to play basketball tomorrow at 6, Coach, or do you want to play tennis? we have a hoop, so
yeah.
I'm kind of fired up to watch you hoop. We maybe do some hoop that day.
Well, as I would say, my skill in basketball was typically, okay, Florian, this over there is the best scorer. Keep him to the lowest amount of points, and if you want to get dirty, just get dirty.
You were a defense guy. Good.
Yeah. So I'll be today you would say, can you do 3 and D? That would be mine.
Yeah.
And then I played point guard, which of course in European basketball, as you know, has a much bigger function than it does nowadays in modern US basketball. So I don't even know when I shot the last hoop, but sure, we can shoot one and see. I'm sure you'll be more skilled at that than I am. I can break down some setups for you, and we can have a conversation about defensive schemes and so on. Not a problem.
Going to the basketball, I was going to talk about. I think I might have sent this to you, Steve, and you may have saw it prior to getting it. That one of the reasons the world's caught up is, America went from really skill-based teaching in many of the sports, basketball being one of them, and this is what it's centered on, this article, and it's evolved into scrimmage, play points in our world without even any type of situational purpose, really, and it's really led to the world catching up. But no,
for sure, it's so well put. Game based, yeah, game based.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball. If you just are Charlie Hustle, you stay between the man and the basket. I've told so many tennis players, get the cones out in the driveway. Yeah, you can go to YouTube, look for some drills, but go right-handed, left-handed, go forwards, backwards, left foot, right foot. And yeah, I've spent my life saying the right things to the wrong people. People don't do it. But I could tell stories about basketball where at the Vic Braden Tennis College is a gym. And I was always in listening to Vic, and he'd give a closing lecture, and the last thing I was going to do is go play basketball. But yeah, I can remember playing a game with the late Tim Gullickson, and some of the players were quite good, and I had to play. And it's like, okay, but just stay between the man and the basket and dive for the ball. And I've told it so many tennis players. I mean, just don't dribble very little, but don't shoot at all. Just play defense. But that's just Charlie Hustle. But no, it's a great sport for footwork. It's a great sport for a transition. I mean, I used to love to go to they called it Bollettieri's at the time, but IMG. One of the first things I would do is just go find Tommy Haas playing basketball, because they would do it for fitness.
Yeah.
Andy Roddick and Marty Fish. Roddick was, I think, the 6th man on the Boca Prep basketball team. Like Johnny Mack. He played some soccer, some basketball. But people need to know the backstories. I'll tell you a story about tennis in Germany. I was in Berlin. Mark Hamlin, first coach I ever trained. We grew up together, and I got him into tennis a few years after I got started. And so he learned to really promote. And he brought Braden to Germany, he brought Vandermeer to Germany, and so a lot of years in tennis now. So for 3 summers, I did I guess it was 7 days. I don't think it was 10, but 7 days for coaches. And the German Tennis Federation told Hamlin if they had me back, they weren't going to rent any courts. And they rented quite a few courts from this large indoor center in Berlin. And, it went through a period where I know Richard Schrobrun he was connected to Braden.
Yep.
I don't think that Richard was fortunate enough to spend enough time with Vic. I mean, it's just like anything. You really have to spend a lot of time with someone. But, he was considered to be a leader in German tennis, but he just got so far away from teaching fundamentals. I used to just say, you're building all these great automobiles. The Germans, it's like they didn't invent the bicycle, but they perfected it. And for a country that is done so well with engineering, how they taught tennis. Of course, in the United States now, I think everywhere. I mean, come back to the Czech Republic, is that a ready position is a ready position. A unit turn's a unit turn, and where did it all go? But no, this has been great to talk tennis. Dave, why don't you wind it down, and I'll say a few things, and then you can close it out, Florian.
Yeah, well, what a pleasure tonight, Coach. Like I said, passion, positive energy, nonstop learner. Your care that you show is incredible for all the people, the class in which you conduct yourself. And every moment there is something for all of us to kind of have a standard for, and just really appreciate getting to spend the time with you tonight, and we'll see you in a few hours. Thank you.
Yeah, no, ditto.
Yeah.
Ditto. It's been great talking to you. I know I got to come out to Dallas. I want to get a pink hoodie. They say if a man wears pink, he's confident. So I got to get a Brookhaven a pink hoodie.
We have it on layaway for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's on layaway.
No, I got schooled the other day. Andy Fitzell, with he's just coaching me on what we need to do with the GreatBase, and yeah, I need to, according to Andy, just start a certification program, and then travel and do more of these workshops, and try to get more people that, okay, do you know this core information, and do you know this basic application? But I have to come out to Dallas and see if we can get some people that want to, learn, say, for example, the Welby Van Horn balance system. It takes like 10 minutes to teach it, but people just, it's amazing. Don't have any idea how powerful that is, how meaningful that is. But go ahead, Florian, close out for us.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for all the kind words, Dave and Steve, for the invite. For me, I don't have the same backstory as some of your other guests, but it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be on this podcast. And I hope that I can maybe give some insight to some people that, see the game of tennis maybe differently, and hope that some of what I mentioned, particularly on the parent side, will help some kids to be let alone a bit more sometimes, and therefore learn the life skills that I think are sometimes more important than than raising the Australian Open trophy as a 22-year-old. So that's I think how I would close, and really pleasure and a big honor to have me on. So greatly appreciate you spending the time with me.
Oh, no, thank you, Florian. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, listeners. Yeah, another podcast in the books. No, definitely, this was very, very enjoyable, and I know people get a great deal out of it. So, again, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, all. Adios, amigos.
All right. Adios. Bye-bye.
All right.